So, have you ever made a massive mistake?
Oh, man. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. I mean, a real undeniable heart-dropping error where you just brace yourself for the immediate
Like
consequences.
sending that catastrophic email to the wrong person.
Exactly. Or, you make a decision that, the very second it leaves your hands is going to blow up your entire life.
Yeah, you close your eyes and just wait for the impact.
Your heart rate spikes, the adrenaline just dumps into your bloodstream, and you wait for the yelling or the firing or just the absolute collapse of your world.
It's a terrifying feeling.
It is. And then nothing happens.
Right, just silence.
The world keeps spinning, the sun still rises, the punishment you were absolutely certain was coming in that exact second just, well, it doesn't arrive.
Yeah, you dodged a bullet.
Right. And that gap, that space between our worst actions and the consequences we actually deserve is one of the most mysterious spaces in the human experience.
It really is a profound and honestly almost an uncomfortable space, that gap.
Uncomfortable is a great word for it.
Because we rarely stop to examine the mechanics of it. The overwhelming biological response is just, pure relief.
Yeah, we just move on as fast as we can.
Exactly. We don't interrogate the silence. But looking closely at the anatomy of that delay reveals it isn't empty at all.
Oh, not at all.
It's actually filled with a very specific, highly intentional, incredibly engineered kind of restraint.
Which is actually the core mission of today's deep dive.
I'm really excited for this one.
Me too. We are unpacking a massive conceptual framework built around one specific Arabic name of God, which is Al-Ḥalīm.
Right. Usually translated into English as the all-forbearing or the patient.
Yeah, but filtering this through a modern, colloquial understanding of patience barely scratches the surface.
It really doesn't do it justice.
So we're going to deconstruct the linguistic roots of this divine restraint. We have a stack of classical texts here, spanning dictionaries, Quranic analysis, and behavioral psychology from centuries ago.
And we're going to analyze how this restraint inherently requires ultimate knowledge and ultimate power to even exist.
Yes, and most importantly, we want to extract the practical insights from these sources for you, the listener.
Because understanding this isn't just an abstract theological exercise.
Right, it's highly practical.
It is a remarkably practical guide for avoiding the psychological trap of arrogance and implementing rigorous, almost aggressive self-reflection in our daily lives.
I love that. So what's fascinating here is that we aren't just looking at a theological concept.
No, we are effectively looking at an ancient blueprint for emotional regulation.
Wow, an ancient blueprint.
Yeah, the classical scholars who analyzed Al-Ḥalīm weren't just charting out the nature of the divine. They were outlining a psychology of human restraint that maps perfectly onto modern cognitive behavioral frameworks.
That is mind-blowing.
It is. The mechanics of forbearance they described over millennium ago offer a direct antidote to the hyper-reactive, impulsive culture we live in today.
Okay, let's unpack this. The genius of these classical sources is that they don't start with lofty philosophical musings.
Right, they start at the granular level.
Exactly, the atomic level of the language. Scholars like Al-Jauhari and Ibn Faris break down the actual linguistic root of the word, which is hilm.
And the foundational meaning isn't just waiting around.
No, it translates directly to leaving haste.
Needing haste, I love that phrasing.
It's deliberation. It's the conscious, heavy friction applied to a situation to actively slow it down.
And to fully grasp the weight of Hilm, you really have to look at the shadow it casts.
What do you mean by that?
Well, you can't understand the friction without understanding the momentum it's resisting. The direct linguistic opposite of Hilm in classical Arabic is Taish.
Okay, so Taish brings in this whole element of volatile impulsivity.
Exactly. It's rashness. It's recklessness.
It's that knee-jerk reaction.
It is the completely amygdala-driven reaction.
Mm.
When a human being experiences Taish, their prefrontal cortex essentially just shuts down.
You've been provoked.
Right. Your ego's been threatened, and your biology demands immediate retaliation. You lash out.
So if Taish is the physiological explosion that happens the millisecond the fuse is lit, what is Hilm?
Hilm is the deliberate, highly conscious cognitive override required to pinch that fuse out with your bare fingers.
Wow. Pinching the fuse out?
Yeah, it is the absolute structural refusal to be rushed into a reaction by external stimuli.
Leaving haste behind. So when classical commentators apply this linguistic root to the creator, when they define what it means for God to be Al-Halim, the scale becomes staggering.
It really does. Al-Tabari and Al-Zajjaj describe it as the entity that absolutely refuses to hasten the punishment of a servant for a sin.
And Al-Khattabi pushes the definition even further into the realm of emotional sovereignty.
Right. He argues that Al-Halim is the one who simply cannot be provoked to anger by the ignorance of the ignorant or the rebellion of the disobedient.
Which is wild to think about. Just think about the sheer volume of provocation happening on a planetary scale at any given second.
Oh, it's incomprehensible. The injustice, the cruelty, the direct, intentional rebellion.
Human patience operates on a battery, right? And it depletes.
Fast. We have a breaking point. We get triggered because our emotional state is vulnerable to the behavior of others.
But Al-Khattabi is pointing out a foundational mechanic of Al-Halim here. It's absolute emotional and reactive sovereignty.
The complete inability to be destabilized. The restraint isn't a struggle for God. It is a structural, intentional delay built right into the fabric of how this entity operates.
And there is a provocative detail highlighted by another classical scholar, Al-Halimi, that fundamentally shifts how we understand this delay.
This part is fascinating.
It is. He points out that Al-Halim doesn't just passively sit back and delay the lightning bolt.
No, it's highly active.
Right. The entity continues to actively, continuously provide life-sustaining blessings to the person while they are in the exact literal act of disobedience.
The distinction between passive ignoring and active sustenance is so critical here.
Yeah, explain that a bit more.
Well, it's the difference between a landlord who ignores a late rent payment and a landlord who ignores the late rent payment while simultaneously bringing you groceries and paying your electric bill.
Oh, wow. That is a great way to put it.
Al-Halimi notes that God is actively providing the health, the wealth, the microscopic cellular functions, the sensory abilities, the very faculties the person is currently weaponizing to commit the wrong.
That is heavy. So a person is using the lens they were given to speak an insult against the creator.
Right.
Or using the neurological pathways they were given to execute a theft. And the creator doesn't just withhold the punishment.
He is actively keeping those lungs expanding.
Yes, keeping that heart beating in the exact nanosecond the betrayal is occurring.
It's hard for the human mind to even process that level of restraint.
It really is. It brings to mind an analogy like on a human corporate scale. Imagine a company CEO who installs a hidden camera and catches an employee actively embezzling funds.
Okay.
The normal human reaction is immediate termination.
Right.
The Thai-ish reaction.
Absolutely. Security escorts them out.
But in this scenario, the CEO doesn't fire them. Instead, the CEO continues to deposit their salary every 2 weeks. The CEO restocks their office supplies. The CEO even approves their holiday bonus.
That's crazy.
Right. The CEO is deliberately underwriting the employee's life, waiting to see if the employee will realize the cameras are there, recognize the depth of their own corruption, and correct their behavior without being forced to.
That corporate analogy perfectly captures the sheer absurdity of this restraint from a human perspective.
It sounds absurd to us, doesn't it?
Totally. In our realm, continuing to pay the embezzling employee feels foolish. It looks like weakness or gross negligence.
We'd assume the CEO is just oblivious.
Right. Or maybe the CEO is afraid of a wrongful termination lawsuit. Human patience is so frequently tied to a deficit.
A deficit of what?
A lack of knowledge or a lack of power. And we project those same deficits onto divine patience.
So what does this all mean for our understanding of patience? Is it just turning a blind eye?
Not at all. And the classical texts prove this through the mechanism of divine pairings.
Right, the pairings. How do we know this isn't just the universe turning a blind eye?
Well, the classical methodology for analyzing divine attributes in the Quran involves looking at how names are clustered together.
Okay, let's dig into that.
In Arabic rhetoric, pairing two absolute attributes modifies and elevates both of them, creating a completely new synthesized reality. They prove the restraint isn't born of a deficit.
And the foundational pairing, the one that anchors this entire concept, is Al-Halim paired with Al-Alim, the all-knowing.
Yes. Ibn al-Qayyim's analysis of this pairing is a brilliant dissection of human psychology. He forces us to confront why humans are usually patient.
And what does he say?
He argues that our patience is almost entirely a byproduct of our ignorance.
We don't react because we literally don't know there's a reason to react.
Precisely. Imagine a friend heavily insults you behind your back at a dinner party.
Okay, ouch.
Right. You see them the next day, and you smile, you buy them coffee, you're perfectly cordial.
Mm.
An outside observer might marvel at your patience.
But I'm not being patient. I'm just oblivious.
Exactly. Your calmness is entirely dependent on a lack of data. The moment you acquire the data, like the moment someone texts you a recording of that dinner party, your patience evaporates instantly.
Oh, completely. Tayesh takes over.
But God's Hilm is permanently tethered to Al-Ḥalīm, perfect knowledge.
The Quranic phrasing specifically places these concepts side by side. It says, and God knows what is in your hearts, and God is all-knowing, all-forbearing.
The implication there is terrifying and awe-inspiring at the same time.
Because perfect knowledge means immediate microscopic awareness.
Yes, unclouded awareness of every hidden sin, every deceitful rationalization, every quiet betrayal behind a closed door. The data is total.
Yet, despite possessing the agonizingly precise details of the offense, the restraint holds.
Ibn al-Qayyim highlights that the Lord Almighty is patient with perfect knowledge. It is a conscious, active suppression of reaction, despite possessing the exact data that would justify annihilation.
It completely dismantles the psychological comfort of getting away with it in the dark.
We all operate under that illusion.
We do. We assume that an unseen action is an unrecorded action. But this pairing argues that the action was fully perceived, the betrayal was fully registered, and it was intentionally met with a suspension of consequences.
And that leads us to the second major pairing, which tackles the other reason humans show restraint.
Right. The sources pair Al-Ḥalīm with Al-Ghani, the self-sufficient, the one entirely free of need.
And Al-Azim, the magnificent, representing ultimate power.
So if ignorance is the first reason humans are patient, weakness is the second.
Exactly. We restrain ourselves when we lack the leverage to retaliate.
Just look at the dynamics of power in our society. Human kings, bosses, dictators, they are usually tyrannical because absolute power notoriously erodes patience.
When a human has no fear of consequences, their ta'ish, their impulsivity, reigns supreme. They yell, they fire, they destroy, simply because they can.
Conversely, your patience with a toxic client or a terrible boss is essentially just a survival strategy.
You swallow your pride and hold your tongue because you are tethered to the paycheck. You need the contract.
Your patience is held hostage by your vulnerability.
Your restraint is coerced. But the text establishes God as Al-Ghani, an entity possessing total existential independence.
There is zero reliance on the universe, let alone a single human's obedience.
Combined with Al-Azim, the ultimate capability to execute any outcome instantaneously, the equation of patience is completely rewritten.
He isn't holding back out of a need for our existence.
Nor out of an inability to deliver the consequence.
When you fuse the all-forbearing with the self-sufficient and the magnificent, the restraint becomes an act of pure, unadulterated mercy.
It's entirely decoupled from circumstance.
When an entity possesses the absolute leverage to dismantle you and has absolutely no existential need for your survival, yet actively chooses to grant you a breathing space, that level of deliberate friction is almost alien to the human mind.
The classical commentators note that human greatness is almost always stained by a severe lack of patience, because power breeds arrogance.
But divine greatness is adorned by forbearance.
That aesthetic description, greatness adorned by forbearance, leads right into the ultimate purpose of this delay.
Why orchestrate this massive cosmic suspension of consequences?
The text answers this by pairing Al-Ḥalīm with Al-Ghafur, the forgiving, and Ash-Shakur, the appreciative.
So the delay isn't a cat-and-mouse game. It isn't just torturing the offender with the psychological dread of a pending sentence.
Now, the Hilm engineers a specific temporal space. It's a window of opportunity for the person to pivot.
And the pairing with Ash-Shakur reveals a radical generosity.
Yes. If the person uses that window to turn back, the slate isn't just wiped clean as an act of neutral forgiveness.
As the appreciative, God actively multiplies the subsequent small positive actions.
It's an asymmetry of justice that favors the human. The patience holds the door open, the forgiveness clears the ledger, and the appreciation creates an exponential return on minimal positive investment.
The delay is fundamentally an invitation.
It is.
No, establishing this vast theological framework is one thing, but grounding it in historical reality is where the text really challenges our modern sensibilities.
It really does. When we look at the historical case studies of this restraint in action, it deeply unsettles our human craving for immediate retributive justice.
We want the bad guy struck by lightning in Act 2.
We do. But the human desire for immediate karma is entirely subverted by these texts. The scope of the restraint demonstrated in these historical accounts forces us to reevaluate our own metrics for outrage.
Let's look at the historical case studies from the text. The first example provided is conceptualized as the ultimate insult.
Yes, the prophetic tradition details how God continuously provisions those who launch the most severe theological attacks against him.
The specific example given is the claim that God has a son.
Within the internal logic of the Quran, this isn't just a difference of opinion. It is a profound structural violation of the Creator's nature.
The text describes this statement as being so heavy, so inherently offensive, that it almost causes the heavens to rupture, the earth to split open, and the mountains to collapse in devastation.
The physical architecture of the universe is depicted as buckling under the sheer gravitational weight of that blasphemy.
The cosmos itself wants to react with violent ta'ish.
That is the magnitude of the provocation. Yet the Prophet Muhammad states, "No one is more patient over an injury he hears than God. They claim he has a son, yet he continues to give them health and provide them with sustenance."
The universe is ready to collapse in outrage, and the Creator's response is to maintain the biological homeostasis of the person speaking the insult.
It's unbelievable. He keeps their crops growing. He ensures their neurons fire correctly so they can even formulate the thought.
It is the ultimate manifestation of the act of sustenance we discussed earlier.
And the texts note that he continues to invite them gently toward clarity and forgiveness. The restraint absorbs the cosmic insult without a ripple of retaliatory haste.
The second historical case study moves from theological insult to tyrannical megalomania, and that is Pharaoh.
Pharaoh represents the absolute apex of human arrogance in these texts.
This wasn't just a political dictator.
No, he instituted a state-mandated theology where he was the supreme being. He declared, "I am your most exalted Lord," and he slaughtered infants on an industrial scale to protect his power.
He is the archetype of systemic corruption and violence.
If you were writing a movie script, Pharaoh is the character who gets taken out by a localized meteor strike immediately.
Exactly. But look at the operational deployment of Al-Ḥalīm here. God decides to intervene, and he sends Moses.
But the specific instruction given to Moses is the focal point. God doesn't hand Moses a weapon of mass destruction.
No, he commands Moses and Aaron to go to this mass-murdering megalomaniac and speak to him with mild, gentle words.
The exact phrasing is, "Speak to him with gentle speech that perhaps he may be reminded or fear."
And notice the timing on that. This isn't before Pharaoh committed the atrocities.
Right, this is at the very height of his violent delusion.
The instruction is fundamentally about psychological de-escalation.
Even for the worst tyrant in human history, the initial intervention is a soft tone.
It is a deliberate attempt to penetrate the narcissistic armor without triggering an immediate defensive spiral.
Giving the tyrant every conceivable cognitive opportunity to recognize his own frailty and pivot.
It's radical restraint. But the third example from the classical sources pushes this to an almost uncomfortable extreme.
The people of the trench.
People of the trench. They were a civilization that engaged in spectacular theatrical cruelty.
They excavated massive ditches, filled them with roaring fires, and systematically threw believers, men, women, and children, into the flames simply for refusing to renounce their faith.
And the perpetrators sat on the edges of these burning trenches, just watching the agony as a form of entertainment.
It is the purest distillation of a crime against humanity.
The visceral horror of that image, sitting and watching people burn, it makes the blood boil.
And yet, the text quotes the early scholar Al-Hasan al-Basri, who reads the Quranic account of this event and is struck not just by the horror, but by the staggering response of the Creator.
What did he observe?
Al-Hasan al-Basri observes the text and says, "Look at this immense generosity and bounty. They murdered his allies, yet he's calling them to repentance and forgiveness."
The Quranic verse states that those who persecuted the believing men and women and then do not repent will face the punishment of hell.
The condition pivots entirely on that phrase, and then do not repent.
The door is left unlocked.
Even after orchestrating a Holocaust, the perpetrators are offered a pathway to complete absolution if they genuinely turn back.
It forces the human mind to confront a generosity that feels profoundly unearned.
It really violates our innate sense of proportionality. That is the vast, almost incomprehensible expanse of divine helm.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. If I'm listening to this sequence, the theological insults, Pharaoh, the trench, I am inherently thinking about the loopholes. If the grace period is this expansive, if you can commit the worst atrocities imaginable, and the immediate response is a gentle word or an open door, Doesn't this make people want to take advantage of the system?
That is a very valid question.
Human nature dictates that we will exploit the system. We will weaponize that patience.
If there are no immediate consequences, the natural human reaction isn't gratitude, it's exploitation.
Exactly. So how do the texts address this trap?
The classical scholars deeply understood this vulnerability. They recognized that the architecture of Hilm creates a perilous psychological trap for the human ego.
Misunderstanding Hilm leads to arrogance.
Yes, mistaking a delayed consequence for a canceled consequence is a fatal cognitive error.
Let's dissect this trap. The central operating principle introduced here is the principle of the deadline.
God grants a delay, but he does not neglect. The Arabic maxim is yumhi wala yumil.
Which means he gives a delay, but he never forgets or abandons the ledger.
The timeline is extended, but the accounting is absolute.
Our neurological wiring makes us terrible at processing delayed consequences, doesn't it?
Oh, we are awful at it. When the lightning bolt doesn't strike immediately, our brains hallucinate a new reality.
We assume the absence of immediate punishment equals the absence of an observer.
Or even more dangerously, we interpret the ongoing blessings, that active sustenance we talked about, as divine endorsement of our corruption.
Right. We embezzle the money, we get a promotion, our health is great, so we conclude the universe actually approves of our ruthlessness.
It is the ultimate confirmation bias. The prophet is quoted explicitly warning about this illusion. He says, "Indeed, God gives respite to the oppressor until, when he seizes him, he does not let him escape."
The texts utilize the eventual destruction of historical civilizations as a brutal reality check, demonstrating what happens when the grace period officially expires.
Because the narrative doesn't conclude with Pharaoh enjoying a gentle conversation.
No, it doesn't. The texts pull back the lens to show the expiration of the deadline. Look at the account of Noah's people.
The sources indicate God exercised patience with them for an unfathomable 950 years minus 50.
For over 9 centuries, Noah acted as the gentle reminder. He preached, he warned, and the society responded with escalating mockery.
They classified him as insane and subjected him to physical violence.
900 years of Hilm. And did that unprecedented runway of patience soften their societal arrogance?
It had the exact opposite effect. The absence of immediate consequence solidified their tyranny.
They assumed the warnings were empty threats. They thought they had permanently won the ideological war.
Until the deadline arrived.
The text describes a cataclysmic, localized reset. The skies opening with torrential rain and the earth fracturing with geysers.
The patience was vast, spanning nearly a millennium, but the deadline was an immutable wall.
The classical sources also point to the ancient Arabian civilizations of Ad and Thamud.
These were societies granted immense physical prowess and architectural genius.
They carved monolithic palaces directly into solid mountain faces. They were the undisputed superpowers of their era.
God sent them messengers, providing clear, rational proofs of their deviations. But their technological and physical supremacy bred an invincible arrogance.
They looked at their fortresses and felt entirely insulated from cosmic consequence.
And when their specific deadline hit, the mechanics of their destruction were ironically tied to their perceived strengths.
They weren't conquered by a superior military force.
No, the text states, Ad was decimated by a furious, howling wind, an invisible force of nature that battered them relentlessly for 7 nights and 8 days.
Leaving these giants hollowed out like fallen palm trunks.
And Thamud was annihilated by a singular, catastrophic acoustic blast.
The ultimate power, Al-Ḥalīm, which had been deliberately restrained by Al-Ḥalīm, was finally permitted to execute the ledger.
It really reminds me of an analogy. Bring back the idea of a credit card.
Yes, the 0% APR credit card. This is exactly how the trap functions in modern life.
It maps perfectly.
It's exactly like maxing out a credit card that has a 0% introductory APR for 18 months.
Because there is absolutely no immediate interest compounding and no late fees hitting your account on month 2 or month 6, you develop a false sense of financial invincibility.
You start treating the credit line like free capital. You swipe for dinners, vacations, things you can't afford.
You receive the monthly statements showing the balance growing, but because the penalty isn't actively hurting you, you ignore the warnings.
You become arrogant with the plastic. You think the money is free.
But the math is still being recorded. Every single transaction is logged.
And on day 1 of month 19, the promotional window slams shut. The grace period evaporates, and the full retroactive compounded reality of the debt crashes down on you.
The 18-month delay was never permission to be reckless.
No, it was a specifically designed runway for you to organize your finances and pay the principal.
That is the exact psychological utility of Hilm. The 0% APR period is the divine grace period, but the ledger is immutable.
The classical texts argue that a functional human being must operate with a synchronized emotional state.
Right. You must possess the absolute, comforting certainty of God's vast, extended patience, while simultaneously maintaining a profound, terrifying certainty of the impending deadline if that patience is continually mocked.
Balancing the fear of that deadline with the hope of the grace period keeps a person on the straight path. It prevents the paralysis of despair on one side and the toxic bloat of arrogance on the other.
Exactly.
So, if exploiting the grace period through arrogance is the primary disease caused by misunderstanding patience, what is the prescribed cure?
The classical scholars diagnose the root cause of this arrogance as a spiritual and cognitive condition called ghafla.
Ghafla, the translation is roughly heedlessness, right?
Yes, but it implies a deep, systemic spiritual amnesia.
Spiritual amnesia.
It is a state of profound, highly distracted unawareness. It is sleepwalking through your own existence.
The theologian Ibn Taymiyyah posits that ghafla, combined with the pursuit of base desires, forms the root architecture of all human evil.
He argues that desire alone is often insufficient to trigger catastrophic actions. It requires the blind, anesthetized environment of ghafla to truly flourish.
You completely lose the plot of your own reality. You forget the existence of the observer, you forget the vulnerability of your own biology, and you forget the inevitably of the deadline.
That is exactly it.
So how do the sources diagnose the onset of this amnesia? What actively causes ghafla?
The diagnostic criteria provided in the texts are remarkably relevant today. The primary cause is foundational ignorance, simply not knowing the attributes of the Creator.
If you don't understand the mechanics of Al-Ḥalīm and Al-Ḥalīm, you cannot accurately perceive your environment.
The second cause is environmental contagion, hanging out with heedless people.
The text explicitly warns against aligning yourself with heedless individuals.
Because amnesia is highly contagious. If everyone around you is sleepwalking, you will eventually close your eyes.
That makes perfect sense. The texts also identify a cognitive distortion, having overly long hopes for the future.
The assumption of unlimited runway. It's the deep-seated belief that mortality applies to everyone else, but you have a special exemption.
You perpetually defer course correction to a hypothetical tomorrow.
Which leads directly to the final symptom, an all-consuming absorption in worldly accumulation and sensory pleasure.
And there is a prophetic warning from the text that feels surgically targeted at the 21st century.
The one about hunting.
Yes. It warns whoever lives in the desert becomes rough, and whoever follows the chase or hunts becomes heedless.
The classical commentator Ibn Hajar breaks this down, explaining that becoming obsessed with the hunt completely monopolizes your cognitive bandwidth, distracting you from your fundamental responsibilities.
The thrill of the pursuit hijacks the nervous system, the constant forward-leaning anticipation of the capture.
And if you think about it, what is the hunt today? We aren't tracking deer in the forest.
No, our hunting is entirely digital and corporate.
We hunt for engagement metrics. We chase the algorithmic dopamine hit of a viral post.
We obsessively track our stock portfolios or climb the corporate hierarchy, refreshing our inboxes at midnight.
Hunting for the next microdose of status validation.
We have constructed an entire global economy built on facilitating the chase, which means we've built an engine designed to generate mass ghafla.
The numbness is the point. The constant shrieking noise of the chase prevents you from hearing the quiet, steady ticking of the deadline.
Because the classical sources identify the pathology of ghafla so accurately, they also prescribe an aggressive regimen of treatments designed to shock the system back into awareness.
The transition from diagnostic theory to operational practice of these texts is fascinating.
These aren't just passive suggestions, are they?
No, they are rigorous interventions. The first prescribed cure is the active pursuit of knowledge.
The text utilizes the Quranic verse, "Only those fear God from among his servants who have knowledge."
Ibn Kathir's commentary clarifies this mechanism. Awe and reverence are directly proportional to data acquisition.
The more granular and profound your understanding of the Almighty's capabilities, the less likely you are to treat the grace period with flippancy.
You cannot respect a deadline if you are ignorant of the entity enforcing it.
The second intervention is the internal, silent remembrance of God.
The scholars describe this using a metallurgical metaphor. Ibn al-Qayyim states that the heart accumulates a layer of rust, the oxidized buildup of heedlessness and unmanaged desire.
And the abrasive polish required to remove this rust is deliberate, cognitive remembrance, and the active seeking of forgiveness.
It is a forced, conscious interruption of the automatic mental loops of daily life.
The third prescription targets the structure of the day. It's protecting the daily prayers, but it places a massive emphasis on two specific variations, the night prayer and the congregational prayer.
The psychology behind emphasizing the night prayer is brilliant. It occurs in the absolute depths of the night when the rest of society is unconscious.
There is no audience. There's no social capital to be gained.
The performative ego is starved of oxygen. Standing alone in the dark forces an unfiltered confrontation with your own existential reality.
It is the perfect inverse of the performative hunting we just analyzed.
Conversely, the congregational prayer is emphasized because isolating yourself from the community is dangerous. A specific prophetic tradition warns that chronically abandoning the communal prayer physically seals the heart, cementing the state of ghafla.
The text also prescribes fasting, but again with a specific caveat. Fasting when no one expects you to, or when others aren't looking.
The prime example given is the month of Shaban, the period immediately preceding the cultural monolith of Ramadan.
The Prophet Muhammad frequently fasted during this time, and when questioned, he explained, "That is a month people are heedless of, and I love that my deeds be raised while I am fasting."
It's about engaging in rigorous self-denial when there is zero cultural momentum to support you.
Fasting in Ramadan is buoyed by the collective energy of the community.
But fasting in Shaban is a solitary act of internal friction. It trains the nervous system to maintain discipline without requiring external validation.
The final prescription is arguably the most visceral and jarring. The active visitation of graveyards to remember the destroyer of pleasures, which is the classical euphemism for death.
The Prophet Muhammad explicitly commanded his followers to visit graves because, as he noted, in visiting them is a reminder.
It is exposure therapy for the ego. We hear the phrase self-reflection today, and the modern wellness industry has commodified it into journaling apps and buying a $40 candle.
Right.
But looking at these classical frameworks, for the listener, practicing self-reflection isn't just journaling. According to these sources, it's actively interrupting your daily routine with stark reminders of your mortality and your creator.
It is an act of calculated violence against the ego. It is aggressively interrupting the momentum of your life with stark, tactile encounters with your own expiration date.
You stand over a mound of dirt, smell the earth, and realize with terrifying clarity, oh, right, the 0% APR promotional period actually comes to an end. This is where the ride stops.
It is the ultimate, undeniable pattern interrupt. You cannot stand over a grave and maintain the delusion of unlimited time.
This brings us to the culmination of the deep dive. We've mapped the cosmic scale of God's patience. We've identified the trap of arrogant exploitation. And we've outlined the aggressive regimens required to cure our spiritual amnesia.
But how do we operationalize this?
Exactly. How does understanding the theology of Al-Ḥalīm help you when someone aggressively cuts you off on the highway, or when a coworker deliberately steals your credit in a high-stakes meeting?
The sources are unequivocal on this final transition. Hilm is not just a divine attribute to be passively admired in theological textbooks. It is a fundamental human virtue designed to be actively emulated.
The overarching ethical mandate is that God is Halim, and he deeply loves those among his creation who adopt the characteristic of Hilm.
The texts point to historical figures who achieved this. The prophets Abraham and his son Ishmael are both specifically honored with the title Halim in the Quran.
The scholar Al-Qurtubi distills the ethical obligation perfectly. He says, "Whoever knows that his Lord is patient with those who disobey him, it is obligatory for him to be patient with those who disobey his own orders."
If you are a beneficiary of the cosmic grace period, you are contractually obligated to extend a grace period to the flawed humans around you.
And to demonstrate what this human Hilm looks like at its absolute zenith, the classical sources provide two powerful case studies from the life of the Prophet Muhammad.
Crucially, these aren't stories of a monk meditating on an isolated mountain.
No, these are accounts of a man navigating the chaotic, incredibly frustrating friction of real-world human interaction and political leadership.
The first one, the story of the Bedouin, is a masterclass in emotional regulation.
The prophet is walking through the city wearing a thick Najdi cloak with a notoriously rough, heavy hem.
A Bedouin man approaches him from behind, grabs the cloak, and yanks it violently backward.
The narrator of the event, Anas bin Malik, observes that the physical force of the pull was so severe it left a deep, visible red laceration on the prophet's neck.
And while maintaining this physical assault, the man rudely demands, "O Muhammad, order that I be given some of the wealth of God that you have."
Analyze the pure Taish radiating from the aggressor here. It is a potent cocktail of physical violence, profound disrespect, and entitled demand.
It is perfectly engineered to trigger a massive adrenaline spike and a retaliatory response.
And we must remember the context of power. The prophet isn't just a spiritual guide at this point. He is the absolute head of state.
He is surrounded by fiercely loyal companions who act as his security. He possesses the immediate, unchallengeable authority to have this man imprisoned or executed for assaulting the leader of the nation.
He holds all the cards, the fuse has been lit, but what is the reaction?
The text records that the prophet turned to the man, looked at him, laughed, and then calmly ordered that the man be provided with a monetary gift.
He didn't order his guards to attack. He laughed.
That single physical action is the absolute embodiment of human Hilm. He experienced the physical pain, he registered the profound disrespect, but his prefrontal cortex completely overrode his amygdala.
He recognized the man's profound ignorance and lack of social conditioning, absorbed the kinetic and emotional energy of the attack, and responded with supernatural equilibrium.
He didn't just suppress the urge to punish, he actively dispensed a blessing in the exact moment of the offense.
It is the human microversion of the divine active sustenance we discussed earlier.
It really is.
The second historical account is even more emotionally devastating. The day of Taif.
The prophet travels to the neighboring city of Taif, seeking political refuge and an audience for his message.
Instead of diplomatic rejection, the leadership weaponizes the city's underclass against him.
They line the streets and systematically pelt him with stones until his shoes are literally filling with blood.
After being brutally rejected, he is chased out of the city, physically battered, exhausted, and experiencing what must have been agonizing emotional rejection. He collapses in an orchard.
It is widely considered the absolute lowest, most physically and psychologically agonizing point of his entire prophetic career. He's completely broken.
And the text details that in this moment of absolute vulnerability, the angel of the mountains manifests, sent directly by the Creator.
The angel offers him a proposition. "If you wish, I will crush them between the two mountains."
He is handed the nuclear launch codes. The ultimate, perfectly justified retaliation is offered to him on a silver platter.
He doesn't even have to execute it himself. He just has to give the nod, and the deadline arrives instantly for the entire city.
This is the ultimate stress test for the human muscle of Hilm. The pain is fresh, the blood is wet, the trauma is active. Does he authorize the strike?
He fundamentally refuses the power.
Yeah.
He responds, "Rather, I hope that God will bring forth from their descendants a people who will worship God alone."
He takes the searing agony of his present reality and consciously chooses to invest it in the microscopic hope of a future generation.
He leaves the haste of vengeance completely behind.
It is a breathtaking display of cognitive and emotional sovereignty.
It really is. Now, while we are highly unlikely to be offered the services of the Angel of the Mountains, the classical sources do not leave us without actionable advice.
They outline highly practical protocols for the listener to begin building this exact neurological pathway of Hilm in their own life.
The prophet explicitly stated, knowledge is only gained by learning, and Hilm is only gained by practicing Hilm.
So it is not an innate genetic trait. It is a conditioned, learned behavior that requires reps in the gym of human interaction.
Exactly. Let's break down the actionable protocols.
How do we train this muscle?
The first protocol is cognitive reframing. It is essentially ancient cognitive behavioral therapy.
The scholar Abu Hatim outlines the mental algorithm. When a rational person is provoked to anger, their immediate duty is to force their brain to recall the staggering volume of patience God has extended toward their own specific failures.
When your colleague aggressively steals credit for your project, before your fingers start typing that scorched earth career-ending email, you must force a cognitive interrupt.
You run the mental tape of all the times you dropped the ball, all the times you were arrogant, all the times you were granted a silent grace period.
It rapidly recontextualizes the offense and drains the ego of its self-righteous fury.
You hijack your own anger by acknowledging, hey, if the architect of the cosmos hasn't vaporized me for my endless repeated betrayals, maybe I don't need to completely incinerate Janet from marketing over a PowerPoint slide.
The hypocrisy becomes too glaring to ignore.
What's the next step?
The second protocol is what we can term the strategy of the opposite.
The texts lean heavily on the Quranic directive. Repel evil with that which is better.
The psychological insight here is that meeting a volatile action with an equally volatile reaction achieves nothing but escalation. It feeds the fire oxygen.
But if you deliberately deploy an asymmetrical response, meeting a screaming insult with a calm smile, or meeting profound stinginess with an unexpected gift, the text promises a specific neurosocial rewiring.
The verse concludes, "Then the one between whom and you there was enmity will become as though he was a devoted friend."
It actually short-circuits the aggressor's expected feedback loop and forces a reset in the social dynamic.
But the texts also acknowledge the raw, biological reality of anger.
Because what happens when cognitive reframing fails? What happens when the adrenaline dump is so massive that your blood is boiling and you cannot think straight?
This is where the classical sources transition into pure physiological intervention.
I found this fascinating. They provide specific physical pattern interrupts prescribed by the prophet for acute anger management.
They target the somatic experience of anger, because anger is not merely a philosophical state, it is a highly activated physiological cascade.
The prophet instructed, if one of you gets angry while standing, let him sit down. If the anger leaves him, good. Otherwise, let him lie down.
The classical scholar Al-Khattabi provides the biomechanical rationale for this. A person in a standing position is kinetically primed for aggression.
They are balanced and ready to strike or move rapidly. Forcing the body into a seated posture physically de-escalates the threat readiness.
And moving to a prone, lying position essentially immobilizes the body, making it mechanically difficult to inflict physical harm.
You are manually overriding your autonomic nervous system. You change your posture to tell your brain the threat level has decreased.
Another physical interrupt is the absolute cessation of speech.
Stay silent. The prophet commanded, if one of you gets angry, let him be silent.
When the prefrontal cortex is offline due to Taish, the tongue becomes an unguided weapon. Silence quarantines the damage.
And the final physiological intervention is the most fascinating, the application of water.
The prophet advised performing wudu, the ritual washing of the face, hands, and arms, to extinguish the fire of anger.
He stated, anger is from the devil, and the devil was created from fire, and fire is extinguished by water. So when one of you becomes angry, let him perform ablution.
From a modern physiological perspective, we recognize this as triggering the mammalian dive reflex.
Splashing cold water on the face and pulse points immediately lowers the heart rate, constricts blood vessels, and forces the parasympathetic nervous system to initiate a calming response.
It is brilliant, ancient psychological rewiring. You are literally deploying cold water to shut down a biologically overheated system.
Changing your physiology to force your psychology to catch up and calm down, creating the necessary seconds of friction to reclaim your helm.
The operational progression the sources provide is entirely comprehensive. It scales from understanding the macro-level architecture of a universe sustained by divine restraint, all the way down to managing your own localized vascular system when someone cuts you off in traffic.
This has been an incredibly dense journey through the mechanics of patience.
It really has.
We started by dismantling the word hilm, discovering it isn't passive waiting, but the active, deliberate refusal of haste and impulsivity.
We saw how this attribute, when applied to the divine, isn't a byproduct of weakness, but requires the terrifying reality of perfect knowledge, Al-Ḥalīm, and absolute power, Al-Azim, to be a true choice of mercy.
We analyzed the psychological hazard of the grace period, how the human ego interprets a delayed deadline as a canceled debt, spiraling into the dangerous amnesia of ghafla.
And we mapped out the intense, active protocols required to cure that amnesia, from the solitude of the night prayer to the visceral reality checks of the graveyard.
Finally, we extracted the tactical, biological interventions, cognitive reframing, posture shifts, and temperature changes designed to help us physically emulate this divine restraint when dealing with the friction of the people around us.
As we conclude this deep dive, there is a lingering structural question we must confront.
What's that?
If Hilm is fundamentally defined by intentional restraint, giving space for growth, and not rushing to punish, we have to ask ourselves about the architecture of the era we currently inhabit.
That is a tough question.
We live in an ecosystem structurally optimized for Taish. We have built a global communication network powered by algorithms that financially reward the fastest, most volatile, most outraged reactions.
We exist in a culture of instant cancellation, immediate notification outrage, zero-tolerance policies, and the public execution of reputations.
Are we actively building a society that makes the divine quality of Hilm nearly impossible to practice.
Wow.
And if the digital and cultural infrastructure around you is constantly demanding your haste, demanding your immediate anger, and monetizing your impulsivity, what deliberate, perhaps even radical actions are you going to take today to reclaim the quiet, unbreakable power of Hilm in your own life?
That is a phenomenal question to carry with you. Thank you for joining us as we explored the profound depths of these classical sources. Take a breath today. Leave the haze behind. Recognize the immense grace period you are currently operating within, and practice a little Hilm today. We'll see you next time.